Welcome to Co-Learning Launch podcast. Today we have with us Ramsri Gola and his name is Gautam. He's also known as the Bahubali of Hyderabad in terms of data science. He's a lead data scientist at Right Hand Cybersecurity, ex-co-founder and CTO of Aurora AI-assisted assessments, and there are a couple of other things to his name. But first, we'll talk about some of the superpowers that he has as the Bahubali of Hyderabad in data science. Ramsri, can you just tell us about your superpower?
Thanks, Kunal, for the introduction. And thanks, Laisha and Yogesh, for having me as part of the podcast for Co-Learning Launch. Getting started with superpower. So, with the experience that I've built over the last 6-7 years, mostly working with startups as well as working in corporations. So, given any problem statement, I would like to think that I can come up with a solution and probably put it in production in a matter of weeks, if not months. That's kind of, I would say, the high level superpower.
Yeah, and rightly said, the way I would like to see it and put it is like if you have a full stack developer and you attach machine learning on top of it, you'll see that the superpower as a data science and a full stack developer really just comes in. Hey, along with me, we have Laisha and Yogesh from Co-Learning Launch, and we'll be hearing a lot from Laisha in terms of some of the questions that we have for Gautam. And obviously, Yogesh, feel free to jump in whenever you can in terms of asking the questions. Let's get started, Gautam. I see that, a lot of our audience is obviously wanting to basically do a lot of machine learning heavy stuff, right? But the kind of journey that you have worked in, right? I would like to take you to the beginning part of it, where you were an electrical engineering graduate, but then you shifted towards data science. How did that happen, and what influenced you to come to this particular stage?
So this was back in the days in BITS 2007 to 11. That's when I studied electrical engineering in BITS Goa. So mostly, like most of the kids, right after intermediate, that is +2, I went on to take I got interested in electronics and then took electrical engineering in BITS. Then what happened was there was a shift in my interest, and constantly I got interested in things like robotics, image processing, and I would say my first trust with data science or something close to that is we usually have these technical competitions in the college, right?
Yep.
So during one of those technical competitions, there was something called IP bot, where there is an image, where there is a camera at the top of a small pool table, and there are some balls of different colors placed on the pool table. Then robot should start in the middle and try to put all the balls of the pool table into the correct holes.
Correct.
So kind of like a very image processing oriented task. And I always felt there was one big gap, which is we learn mathematics, science, all of those in school, but more like a theory.
Yeah.
In the sense that unless you go to good international schools, etc. Most of us coming from normal background would do heavy math intensive courses without science intensive courses without much practical application.
Right.
That's true for most of us, and I grew up the same way. So it was the first time when I realized there was a practical problem solved with applied mathematics and some image processing. And I participated in that, and I don't remember, but we got like third prize or something in the college.
Wow,
so
nice.
That was like a very strong beginning point where I got interested in image processing. So up until then, I wasn't really familiar with any of these computer science terms, even core computer science terms, except data structures or except few programming languages, etc. So that's when I got started, and we initially coded in MATLAB, and there was quite a bit of hardware integration as well.
Correct.
Because we had to run the robot.
Yep.
So that gave me a good starting point, and from then on, I started taking some courses in image processing as electives.
Correct.
Then from there, I began, and then right after my graduation, from bachelor's. I went on to do my master's in Arizona State University,
Correct.
where I again took signal processing and image processing computer vision,
Yep.
again in electrical engineering, but core focus on computer vision.
Correct.
From there, I think so it was right around 2012-13. That's when I graduated with my signal processing computer vision degree. And it's an important point in the deep learning phase as well, because AlexNet, that is the major breakthrough of applying deep learning to solve ImageNet problems, came out during that time.
Okay.
And it was right about the time I graduated, and I didn't know much about deep learning up until like 2 years, but I slowly started picking up from there, and then I gradually had quite a lot of journey throughout the phases, and this is where I am. I think we can go deeper into each of those.
Yeah, definitely. Yeah, and let me tell you that, hey Gautam, even I'm from Hyderabad. So
Great.
Most of my friends used to talk to me in Telugu. I understand it very well, but I cannot speak back the same language. And most of our time, usually, as we know, Friday evening movies and all the releases, we've gone through all of that thing, right? And pretty much I could relate to your technical background. Like when we are learning something in college, it's pretty much theory, right? And if I fast forward the journey now, you'll see that I'm very excited to learn this particular field. If I had this exposure back then, the story would be very different, right? And here's some of the audience that we have here with us is they're in engineering college and they're just passing out. I wanted to bring a focus to some of the learning that I've seen on your profile. And let me tell you that, hey, Gautam has several courses on Udacity, Coursera. And so when I say several, it's 25 plus. I think so. Some of them are still not mentioned on his profile, but I can see a very good quantity on that particular courses, right? So first of all, I want to bring the focus on how these courses, what are the timing? Did you do it during the college time when you're graduating, or you still do them even after graduating? Tell us something about the courses that you do. What's the timing?
So one of the main things is that I wasn't really exposed to this MOOCs or courses, massive online open courseware in college. So college, mostly it was a bit of extension of what I was doing in my engineering. Even in masters, I did coursework, and I tried to land up some job in one of the companies, either Intel or any of those software companies. That was my biggest goal. Okay. I think what happened was right around 2012-13, I joined my first job, and I was the first engineer in a startup. And to be very honest, I did not perform up to the expectations. Okay. And one of the main reasons was that I come from this core background of like signal processing and computer vision, but I wasn't like very fully involved in practical experience as well as the startup experience, and again delivering products on time and accountability and things like that.
It's too much pressure. It's too much pressure at when you're beginning up, right? Even I can recall all of that thing.
Absolutely. So thinking back, I see that maybe I wasn't prepared as a first engineer in a startup, in the sense that I needed to have little more wide-end exposure. But anyway, I did my best, and again the startup did not take off even for like financial reasons and market validation reasons. The startup got shut down in 1.5 years. So I was back to square one in my job search. And in US, there is this concept of OPT. So basically, once you graduate, you have like 1 year or 1.5 years to find a job. And I already expended my 1 year during that time. I had like 3 months to 6 months left on my OPT, which means either I find a job in that time, a job that pays above a certain salary, or I move back to India since my validity expires.
Correct.
So during that time, it hit me hard, extremely hard, in the sense that I always thought that, okay, more or less I was doing things right, but I came to a very humble realization that I wasn't up to what's expected in the industry.
Correct.
And
It's sort of a fight or flight mode, right? You are in.
exactly,
Yeah.
exactly. So back then, I mean, during all the financial things, of course, you have accumulated college loan and all these things. So I took a very aggressive approach. I don't necessarily say that it's the right approach, but
Hmm.
what I did was, there were these recruiters calling me, trying to. So there are these middlemen who try to
Yep.
find you into the right jobs.
Yep.
So they are like just recruiting consultants.
Hmm.
So one thing that I remember very very clearly is that
Hmm.
one of the recruiter asked me, "What are your skill sets?" And he asked about what my resume is, what I've done. Then at the end of the call, I asked him one thing: tell me what are the top paying jobs in Silicon Valley in tech. I
And
will learn that in 2 months and I will
okay.
be there. Don't ask me what my background is. Of
Correct.
course, I come from a like programming background and in this, but just give me what are the top three jobs that are
Hmm.
paid high salary. And I
Hmm.
took such a, I would say,
Human
aggressive,
task. Yeah.
yeah, that I learned things completely just because they were high paying and they were in demand. I learned them.
That's where the
And
Bahubali sort of kicked in, I guess.
exactly, I think I never had to use the best arrow in my wallet.
Hmm.
Now, once it came to a stark realization that I wasn't up to the mark
Hmm.
and I was quite a lot different from what's expected in the industry,
Hmm.
then I took it up a challenge. Then I think that was the most accelerated phase where I counted up to every single dollar. That means if I had an insurance plan that I was paying, let's say $1,000, I cut down everything to bare minimum and got it down to whatever 695. So I counted up to every single dollar, and for those 3 to 6 months,
Hmm.
it was very very crucial and extremely I was focused on point. And through
Hmm.
this process I got to know about online learning, so I would find the best course to learn something. I would freely sign up for these AWS credits or Google Cloud credits and
Hmm.
practice them. So at the end of 3 months I was able to land a job in Intuitive Surgicals. So
Hmm.
Intuitive Surgicals is a world leader in medical robotics.
Hmm.
So I joined the team as computer vision engineer,
Hmm.
and I would say the acceleration began there,
Hmm.
and it ended up that in 3.5 years, I
Hmm.
reached up to a point where I could drive a Porsche with my own money in Bay
Wow.
Area.
Wow.
Uh, yeah.
So that speaks
So
volumes, and it fast forwards a lot of the hard work is that went into going into that position. But I also like to
exactly.
bring focus to the learning period that you interestingly mentioned, right? It's 3 months period. And I've seen a
Yes.
lot of learners go even beyond 6 months, 7 months, or 8 months, and all of that, and still not get to the right direction of that thing. So I want to bring the focus towards that 3 months. How did it look like? Like, obviously there, if you don't have any direction, you can go from course to course, course to course. Um, some of them may be useful, some of them not that useful. So in a short summary, how would you like to redo the 3 months if you are with the current knowledge you have, right? How would you more
Hmm.
optimize it? Can you make it shorter, like let's say 1 month, and do that same learning that you did in 3 months?
Hmm. So one thing that I need to add here is that I didn't stop with those 3 months. I continued on for the rest of the past 5 years. That I accelerated to the point that I quit my job in Silicon Valley, high-paying job, and I returned to India and then went to Singapore and started my own startup and all this journey. So everything was fueled from those initial started 3 months,
Yep.
and I continued on from there.
Okay.
Now, answering your question, so one very very important thing that I always followed was, eh, so I see most of these LinkedIn posts to become a data scientist, do this probability and stats from here, do these things from here, and that is where in marketing tactics you have something like churn rate, right?
Yep,
So you
yep.
bring in 100 students, and how many graduate? I think most of them, 80 or 70 to 80 of them fall short of graduation just because you put those high entry mathematical barriers there.
Correct. Yeah. So true.
Now,
So true.
where I think more are failing to understand is to take them through a very, very practical approach.
Correct.
So the way I was working with a friend very recently to try to get him into NLP and data science. So what I made him do was that I first took him to like a page where there are reviews for Google. On Google Play Store, you have reviews, right?
Right. Yeah.
So I showed with an example how I can take all those reviews, scrape them using Beautiful Soup or something.
Yep. Yep.
Then how we can, let's say you are a guy who released this product. Now you're going through this 1,000 reviews. You have to try to understand what is being mentioned in each.
Correct.
And try to group similar things. Can we do the same thing with NLP? So I used sentence transformers and I used embeddings and I tried to cluster them and show clusters such that in the end, he could just see a single cluster and all the things like this is very good, this is very nice, this is awesome. All those things are bucketed into one and the rest of the things are are in other.
Yeah.
So mainly, I first introduced a practical problem to solve. I made him go through that. I was coding along and then I showed and I explained all word vectors, etc. on a high level. Then what I gave after that was gave an NLP course. I suggested an NLP course on Udemy so that everywhere I was guiding him on point and trying to see how it relates to back to practical real world knowledge.
Right.
So that's when he got very interested and said, this is very cool. If we could do this, then it's amazing.
Yep.
So in short, what I'm trying to say is that work with practice, then work backwards. Of course, you would never lose the basics of maths, but work backwards from a practical standpoint.
Correct.
Then
Correct.
I think you get the best
Yep.
knowledge out of it. And that is the biggest way you can reduce the churn rate. That is people dropping off in the middle.
MOOC. Yeah. And the MOOCs, so the official, dropout rate is roughly around 70 to 80%, which means that
exactly
you have only roughly 20% as on the higher side of people finishing the MOOCs, right? And some of this experience as a teacher in data science or a mentor in data science, I could very well relate to what you're saying, like, begin with the end goal in mind or a practical solution in mind, and then throw them into the course. Then they know exactly what to look for, right? And then some of the examples that I usually begin with is like I begin with a very complex dashboard and show them how it's done and all of that thing. And then when I teach the small nuances of what's a drop down, how do we do this, how do we pivot the data, or show them, right? They are like springing up to action, and they're creating or co-innovating so many things along the way, which they never would have done if they did not know how the end result would look like. And that's a very important learning for our audience, where just jump into the some of the implementation part immediately, and then go back and look at what courses are needed to support you solving that or finishing that project. And that's a very interesting learn. I think so that speaks a lot about how you're organized as a learner, and doing the right things to be accomplishing a task versus just learning for the sake of learning.
Absolutely. One important thing here is to work with mentors, because when I explain this practical path to tracing back to maths, it's a very non-linear path.
Correct.
And to trace this non-linear path, there are potholes everywhere. So you need someone to constantly fill in those things so that you don't get stuck. So one drawback of this is that you need a mentor that you closely work with.
Constantly available. The availability becomes a big factor then.
Exactly. So the traditional learning journey where you, let's say, take some prop stats from Khan Academy and then you learn all those things, linear equations, probability, and then scale up. That is good for very, very sharp and organized and motivated learners, which fall, I would say, 5% of the category.
I think so. It will be even smaller.
Exactly. It's even smaller. And why I am little worried with all the influencers is, I mean, they all suggest these courses as a starting point, and that's where people fall fall back and they have
through
nowhere
the
to go
cracks.
from there
Yeah,
because they're
yeah.
losing.
And I see a lot of students coming back constantly, falling through the cracks. And okay, I did this course, what now? Right? And for 90% of the time, I would know that they did just, like a passive watching, like you're watching Netflix or something like that. You're just going through it,
Exactly.
going through the motions, but the recall is very less, right?
Yes.
The ideal way is that you have the end goal in mind, and then you're working towards the project, towards the courses that actually solve that. And thank you for bringing out this very important point. Cool, Gautam. So I would now transition into something towards your current profession. I see that you have moved from Aurora to a profession where you're doing AI and ML in cybersecurity, right? So
Yes.
Personally, I don't know much about cybersecurity. When I did my computer science engineering from Hyderabad, from Institute of Aeronautical Engineering, at that time we were like very fascinated with hacking or cyber, anything that involved the word of cyber. But personally, I did not follow through on a lot of these things. So can you just tell us about your current profession, what cybersecurity is, and what are the instances of ML applications that pique your interest in that area?
Let's begin with what I kind of do at Right Hand Cybersecurity. So it's a small team of 10. It's a nascent startup that raised seed funding, and I joined them as lead data scientist. So as of now, it's me and one or two interns, and we are slowly building up the team. So the company solves one major problem, which is at this current point in time, humans are the weakest link in cybersecurity. What that means is that if there is a cybersecurity breach, or all the passwords are stolen, or your money is stolen, bank accounts are stolen, then there is some human fault somewhere most of the time, because they were not very cyber aware. Even with coronavirus, like people call and ask what's the OTP that we want to deliver this thing, that thing, then people sometimes give, or they click on malicious links, right? So our core focus is to enable people in an organization to be very, very cyber ready. That means if someone spoofs CEO's email and sends them, or if someone spoofs like a HR and sends them a phishing email and asks them to give details of their bank account, can employees be cyber ready? Correct. So our core focus is to develop all these things. So whatever is necessary for all the employees to be ready. So that means doing this simulation of phishing emails, then providing them training modules, how to be cyber ready, then identifying the weak links, people with high risk score, and trying to give them more training and things like that. So all these things. And I take care of all the machine learning aspects in this, including there are compliance documents from which you automatically create these assessments, questions as well. Right? So I automate that module as well, where given any compliance document, we auto generate some MCQs and true or false questions.
And then they're dynamic in nature, right? Some of the compliances that I've taken in terms of security, they're pretty much the same questions every year. So you just go click, 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 click. You're not really processing anything. And that's one of the important things. It intrigued my interest is whenever we are taking a cyber security assessment or something like that, it remains a 1-year activity. But what remains with us is the in point action, right? So if I have an email with me, and if there is a assistant telling me, can this be fishy or something like that, just to jog my memory or mindfulness that this may be a security, probably that will be very helpful in terms of doing that. It's sort of like your AI assisted writer in terms of AI assisting security. For us, like some of the computer science geeks, it's very easy to identify. Like if you see the email ID, you know that okay, this is fishy, or if you see the font change, it is fishy. Like we have some kind of algorithm built to check out some of these phishing rates, but not all of them have the same, right? Very interesting area to work in. And how do you see the potential of this cyber security ML space there? And if some of the audience that here want to join this space, what should be they looking forward to coming into this particular industry?
So one of the main things is to get familiarized with the cybersecurity space, which involves this phishing as well as malware, where people ask you to download a software onto your computer, and they could be malicious, that could stream logs and things like that. and also getting a broad awareness of cybersecurity space. What are all the things involved in it? That's a good starting point. Then take it from a ML standpoint. What are all the things that you could solve with cybersecurity? Let's take a computer vision example. So one of the main things is the way people put cybersecurity domains as well as web pages is they will always simulate with something that you're close with. Let's say if you are an Axis Bank user, then they will create a page with all Axis Bank header and everything and the login looking the same way. So unless you look at the top URL, you're unaware and you might even input your details, right?
Correct. Yeah.
So one thing is that we are trying to use computer vision algorithms to try and understand what web pages look similar. So it's almost like an image matching problem. And again, training these NLP engines to identify phishing versus non-phishing activity.
Correct.
And so take from a practical standpoint how you can integrate state-of-the-art research. And so one thing is having good knowledge of cybersecurity. That's a good starting point. Then having knowledge in NLP, computer vision, and traditional ML, at least on a higher level. Then you can think of these applications, how cyber criminals are trying to spoof regular audience, and how you can use algorithms to be better than the cyber criminals. And one main thing is, at the end of the day, cyber criminals can only spoof with text and image.
Correct.
Of course, there are other means, but prominently, you read an email and you download something.
Correct.
Or you are asked to enter something on a web page that is very, very similarly looking, and you forget and automatically don't look at the URL and you enter the details.
Correct.
So at the end of the day, they are using your visual, auditory, and text and all these senses and trying to spoof or cause havoc in the regular way of life.
Yeah, it's just like a magician doing his handy tricks on a show, but they are more embedding it with the technology such that, it seems like what they are just doing some misdirection to get that attention. Does deep fake that is coming in right now, generated videos and all of these things, does it come into the cybersecurity part, or is that a very separate topic altogether to be looking at, the deep fake that is coming in right now?
So one of the things is these deep fakes become a part of toolkit to the cyber criminals. How you can assume is that, let's say I send you a video message with the CEO.
Correct.
Then if you can deep fake your CEO's face and send a video message, perhaps you don't even look at the URL or where it originated, right? If you just see your CEO's face on a YouTube video and you are asked to sign up on this link or sign here for getting benefits or something like that, or from HR, then so one of the main things is that these become embedded in the toolkit of cyber criminals. So as cybersecurity researchers, we need to be very, very aware of these things and see how we can identify deep fakes as well. So that's one of the active area. But directly there is, I would say, in average humans, apart from misdirecting them, I would say there are not that many things that deal with that are directly dealt with deep fakes, but they become a toolkit to cyber criminals. So it is very, very essential for us to be aware of that.
Yeah, so true. I mean, which is again very interesting for whoever is coming into the industry with this particular domain in mind. Hey, you have a lot of deep fakes coming in, but you have that anti-task, sort of like a CBI or a FBI sort of thing to identify that thing, and you need to up your skills even more so to identify deep fakes, right? So that's something very, very interesting. So which brings us to now your esteemed Aurora AI assisted assessment. As a trainer or mentor, I've always worked with some institutes which later ask me things like, hey, can you give us some questions that we can really look at and send it to the students and assess them, right? Then I'll be like, okay, shit, I have to make a lot of these things. And the moment I read about your AI assisted assessments and some of the blog posts that you have put in Medium, within the 2 months that you have written it. So
Yes.
I was like, oh, I mean, if this can be done, like I'm really interested for me as a profession, as a teacher, right? How can I leverage AI and ML for this side of mentoring and teaching and all of that thing, right? It sort of opened
Mhm.
up a spark in mind about what are the things I can as I do as a mentor or a trainer to connect with the students better in terms of taking the small instances. So what I would like to bring your attention to is how this idea sparked and what was the, I mean, we're not going to speak about the entrepreneurial journey. Obviously, that is another part of it. Our interest is basically that you want to build an AI assisted assessment, and what sort of sparked that idea?
So one of the main things is that we started with a very, very open idea of what AI can do in education. So I had a business co-founder, and she worked in education primarily.
Mm-hmm.
And when we were part of the Startup Accelerator Entrepreneur First in Singapore, we started with a very open, broad idea, and we explored, talked to about 100 plus education companies all over the world, including the ones like Byju's, Vedantu, and everyone.
Mm-hmm.
So we identified three main categories. One is right now the video is booming, the video teaching.
Mm-hmm.
So can we use some computer vision analytics? Let's say if there are 50 students,
Mm-hmm.
and if someone is distracted and not looking and watching, doing something else, can we immediately pop up so that teachers can just click a button and it will send a notification?
Great.
And again, in this chat that is happening online, there are students who are bullying other students. Can we automatically identify bullying and mute the student or do things like that? So that's one analytics where can we serve the growing video platforms that are coming up. Then the second one was adaptive learning. Can we use existing AI technologies and futuristic AI technologies to try and create a learning path for a student that will be very, very personalized? And the third one was teachers. And if you take corporations, they also open source and put in quite a lot of work to create these assessments. Can we automate that assessment process? That means if given it some text, let's say a story or a concept, can we automatically generate some MCQs, true or false, like the ones you see at the end of the textbook? Yeah. Can we get AI to do that automatically? Yeah. And that's what we focused on. And throughout our research, we finalized exploring the business use case scenarios. We finalized onto the AI assisted assessments, and we narrowed on to this. And then we went on to implement and get funding. And one main thing to remember is that our AI assisted assessments right now, because of the state of the art AI, probably we can serve middle school content, not very high level logical thinking content, but middle school content. If you have a story, we can automatically generate questions, multiple choice, and fill in the blanks. And we can do the same for like an English story or a science story. If you're doing some session on mitosis, meiosis, cell reproduction, something like that, we can automatically generate some questions as well.
While you're implementing some of these assessments work and all that, what are some of the backend packages that you have evolved from? So what you started with, and what's the state that you have evolved to, and forward looking, what are some of the packages that are very exciting for you to use?
Great. I think it's a very, very great question, because I struggle to implement this question generation, and I've been in this for the past 1.5 years. So I have seen it, how I've seen through how it evolved, the state of the art, as well as our question generation process. So one main task to consider was all of these are sequence to sequence tasks. That means you give in some text or paragraph as input, and probably answer also coupled with that. That means, let's say Taj Mahal was built in whatever 1868, something like that. Then you give that sentence and you give 1868. Let's say you give the same thing to human. Then he or she will try to generate when was Taj Mahal built. So similarly, for the AI models, you give your sentence and let's say answer as input, and it will generate a question.
Correct.
Right?
Okay.
So all of these are sequence to sequence tasks where you have text as input and text as output. And back when we started, transformer models were just picking up. There were no sequence to sequence tasks that were solved with transformers. Mostly it was like BERT classification and things like that. So we started with the traditional sequence to sequence models using LSTMs. So in translations, like Google Translate, on all these things were built on non-transformer based models 1.5 years ago, right? So then we tried with that, but the biggest problem with the LSTMs and those sequence to sequence models were that the questions that were generated were not grammatically correct most of the time. There was no heavy grammar involved in it because there is no language modeling, if you realize today.
Correct.
So what we did was we trained them, then we tried to improve them with concepts like pointer generated networks to change some attention and try to generate more plausible or more coherent questions. But
Correct.
things were not up to the mark, and we thought that is the baseline and let's keep it there. But what happened was, as transformer models came, then first BERT came, which is like just an encoder transformer model. Then GPT-2 came, which is a decoder transformer model. BERT is mostly for like these classification tasks, and GPT-2 was like this generation tasks.
Correct.
Then using a combination of both, then came, so our next model that we trained was with GPT-2. For GPT-2, you give a sentence and you let it fill up, right?
Correct.
That means you give a blank and it will fill up the blank.
Fill
so
up
we
the blank.
converted, yes. So we converted our problem such that we give with some context and answer, and we let it generate the answer. It was very close. I mean, it did fairly well when compared to LSTMs. And we also had like great model that we put in production with GPT-2 itself. So there's one research called Squash, which was very, very, very crucial for our experimentation. And we, it was a breakthrough because they put in all the code and how they trained and everything. So we branched off of that.
Nice.
We branched based on that. And it was doing well, but there is quite a lot of complexity since you have to give this GPT-2 in a particular format. So the training was hard, and the model size was also big. GPT-2, what we were using was like 1.5 plus GB. Then came in the last 1 month, came T5 transformer model.
And so this is something that you have already written in some of your blogs about.
And I would say almost T5 looked for us like a bullet that could solve all. And so far it has been doing extremely well. That means there is no complex training that is required for T5, in the sense you can give your text the same way as it is, just context colon your sentence, then answer colon, and then you have your question generated.
Okay.
And so in the last 1 month, our production models have been upgraded to T5 based models. And so far I would say for question, so T5 is not advertised as it is for question generation, but we used for question generation, and the results are beyond extraordinary. I would say with just maybe like 1,000 training samples itself, it starts to generate very plausible questions that you can use.
Awesome.
And our current model is based on T5, where we trained with squad dataset on text as input and answer as input, and it generates a question. And similarly, we give our true or false the same. So we give a sentence and we ask true or false question to be generated, and it will generate a Boolean question that will be either true or false.
So, some of these things goes back to what you were saying earlier, right? Where you have an end goal, you'll see that you have evolved your algorithms to solve a particular problem, right? You're never stuck or stuck with a particular problem statement. Like some of the students ask us, like, is this better or is that better? And then my standard response to them is, hey, what solves the problem? Is that solving the problem better, or is that solving the problem better? Be it hardware, is it optimizing for hardware? It is optimizing for speed, optimizing for production. What is it that is solving and making it better?
Yeah, I think you brought up a really, really good point, because after we trained our model, it took us almost 3 weeks to get a production version ready, because we had to retrain few things. Production latencies are extremely high for few of them.
Correct.
And we had to go back to our drawing board, see how we could improve our algorithm. Kind of like, what can you use for productionizing these models, because you need to balance multiple things. One is cost. How much does it cost for you to deploy it in production? Because if you're using AWS, Google Cloud, the cost scale up really high.
Yep.
Because sometimes you have to use GPUs versus non-GPUs. That's one factor. Then latency is another factor. Because if you're making them wait, let's say 30 seconds to 1 minute to generate questions for a small paragraph,
then it's very difficult. You already lost that attention. Yeah.
Exactly. Users are not going to be happy. So we have to balance cost, then speed. And the other thing is that what's the model size? Because if you're auto scaling, you want it to be packaged in a very as less resource intensive as possible. Correct. So that when you're auto scaling and things like that, it scales up well. Correct. And there is complexity of maintenance as well. If your code and deployment is very complex and training is complex, you cannot iterate on the model. Correct. So balancing all these things, I would say it's almost as hard as a task as you are developing a model. Correct. Most people think they can make a Flask API and it's done. But let me remind you, like on top of Flask, you have to put, let's say, GUnicorn or UVicorn to serve these. Then you have to enable auto scaling. Then you have to create Docker containers or something similar to deploy everywhere. So all these challenges of balancing all these 3 or 4 pillars is extremely crucial.
And that's why we call you the Bahubali, because you're seeing end to end. And for some of the audience here, let me break down some of this content. What courses people are learning right now is just the model building part, right? That's just like the beginning part of data science. Like unless it is moving to the production in a seamless fashion where the end user is actually finding no difference in any other Google Store app that's like really optimized, that experience is not carried out to the user, then you're like losing a big part of data science. And Gautam has mentioned in few minutes is actually a very big journey taken, a lot of preparation for that, right? So now on a side note, just taking you right, I've personally struggled with a lot of this computational power, and like I'm on a verge of getting some equipment for my models, right? So what's your personal hardware look like, and do you have some recommendations for like how should you set up your hardware for deep learning or some of these cool things that you do?
So one thing was that as of now, we have all these. If you're working in a company, etc., then you have these cloud GPUs and cloud credits. Correct. But as a student, or if you're working on your own on side projects, you do not have, right? Yeah. So one of the main things is these costs are extremely high. If you let a GPU run, even the cheapest GPU will cost somewhere between $400 to $600. So one thing that I did was, back in US, I realized quickly in the first go that this is not scalable. Yeah. So I went and bought like, I don't remember, it's NVIDIA RX 2080 Ti or something.
Yeah, Ti, yes.
Exactly. So it was like $1,200, but it served me for a good year where I could train whenever I want. Since I come from electrical engineering background, it was easy for me because I was not daunted to open the CPU, get a new power connection, connect all the cards, etc. So I also made a video on YouTube on that.
Yeah, I'd love to check it out sometime.
Absolutely. So what I did was I ordered this from NVIDIA. Then in my existing desktop, I removed and added this. Then I had to get a new power supply since it wasn't enough. But eventually, of course, I think now there are like Lambda Labs and all these startups that are providing these. Probably they take like $400, $500 extra to assemble everything. But for like $2,000, $3,000, you can get some of these hardware built and CUDA and everything installed. So there are pros and cons. The pros are that you don't need to worry about these high-end costs. The con is that you need to install CUDA and upgrade things and maintenance part. But my short answer is, if you're doing any training beyond 6 months, try to put effort in putting up a GPU yourself. It could be even a lower version GPU. That's okay. But if you're doing any training above like 6 months, it's worth putting up everything and trying to run on there. You have the flexibility.
Correct. So currently you have some of these 2080s or double or triple of them how do you have it set up for you?
I think I have one or two of them. But to be honest, since I work in a company, it's easier for me to do cloud logins.
Leverage all of that. Yeah. Okay.
Yeah, because we have, if you live in India, we have power cuts and
Yeah,
all these things
absolutely.
generated.
It's
So
very annoying on the power cuts at least. I was also looking up some of the new advancements in the NVIDIA. They have the 30 series coming in, which is again something that I'm waiting for. And cool. So that's about some of the hardware. Some of the listeners that you're looking at. You don't need to be bogged down with a lot of this advanced stuff, even when you're beginning off, right? Like even if you're solving some of the MNIST problem statements that you have as a beginner, some of the the smaller scale GPUs are sufficient enough for you to run the tasks and not wait for a lot of logging hours. And obviously, you can leverage the 30 hours of GPU and TPU that is available on Kaggle or Colab platforms in case you want to. Yeah,
there's Paperspace as well.
Yes, yes.
Yeah.
I've recently got into Paperspace and put some of the models and doing it. It's pretty cool to explore that particular tool also. So yeah, so some of these PaperSource, Kaggle, or Google Colab is something that you can start off when you're learning. But if you feel that you can stick on and this is for you, then you can go ahead and invest in some of your own GPUs. But ensure that you put some good power backups to nullify your power cuts and all of that. If you're in India, that is. Okay, so which brings me to another aspect of Gautam that he recently discovered or did out of boredom, or we can call it, let's say, overproductivity, so as to what Gautam calls it, right? So in the COVID-19 lockdown period, Gautam took it up to himself to start writing articles. He wrote certain articles. He got some 40K views on top of them. One of the articles even generated $25, which he thought was not so much as attention grabber, but very basic material that he wrote. But it generated $25 there, right? So Gautam, like, what was your experience in terms of starting to write on Medium? Did you have the back of the mind that you want to earn out of this writing? Because some of these periods are very relevant to back in the days. Some of the epic writers that we know, the classical writers we know, they also started writing because they had some kind of a lockdown, such as this COVID, this thing. Right? There were some people that wrote several books during a 7-month or 8-month period, which became classics today that we read. So what is your take on that 2 months period, and how did you start writing, and like how do you see that writing going on or continuing with you?
I think that's a great question. One thing that I wanted to start off with was my social media data science journey began almost like 7 years ago, where I was asked by a professor to explain face detection model. So there's Viola Jones face detection model. Mm-hmm. So I read up the paper and there were no online resources. So I was angry that there were no online resources that could help me learn. Uh-huh. So I put together the presentation and I explained for 1.5 hours the whole face mm-hmm. detection algorithm. Mm-hmm. And it's got almost 200K views so far mm-hmm. on YouTube.
Wow, that is cool.
Yeah. I think that gave me a huge boost, and I also could earn. Back in the days, there were no like 4,000 hours and all these restrictions for YouTube.
I'm personally bearer of that. Just when I had 1,000 subscribers, they changed the algorithm, and oh shit, now I have to work for 4,000 hours of views.
I absolutely feel you, because I used to earn maybe like $10, $15 a month back in the days. Mm-hmm. Because of these videos, and there were some unboxing videos of drones, etc.
Yeah.
And that began, and in the middle, I didn't do much of the content, and mostly I concentrated on my journey, learning, and startups and things like that. But one main thing that has happened was, so one thing to note is that Aurora, we had quite a lot of journey, and we almost closed the round for $1 million. With mm-hmm. VCs as well, but there were some differences between the co-founders, so unfortunately we had to call off our company. Mm-hmm. Then it struck me that we have put in so much effort to build these question generation algorithms and mm-hmm. everything. Mm-hmm. So why don't we open source it? That is what I thought.
Yep.
Since I'm the tech guy, I thought I built them. So of course, the tech and everything is owned by both of us. Since we shut down the company, there are no other clauses that anything is owned by anyone. So I was free to open source them.
Correct.
Then adding that was the COVID-19 fuel. So I got a lot of free time. So free time and previously built tech that was ready to be productionized.
Correct.
These two things coupled, what I decided was, let me put all of these things out so that people could benefit from it. Then I slowly started writing, and I started writing these question generation algorithms to generate true or false, multiple choice, using all these BERT, GPT-2, sentence parsing, all of these. I built up some interesting projects and put them. And slowly I started getting views. Then I wrote a data science article, how to get into data science, and that was like a
That's a very hot topic. Yogesh can also comment on it.
So suddenly I realized that, Medium is a platform where you could actually earn money. And one main thing, since I lived in the US and I pay all my taxes and I have my bank accounts open still, so it was easy for me to get paid through the US channel. I mean, I feel very unfortunate for great writers in India who are not getting. I think that is a very, very very bad thing that there are great writers who are contributing extremely well, but they are not getting a penny. I feel very bad for them as well.
So true.
But fortunately, I was able to get in some views, and slowly it started picking up. So my monthly revenues were in the upper $70-80 for like last 2 months, and it's on the same trajectory this month as well. So what I realized was, even if you're working in a company, maybe you don't need to outsource the exact code, but there are quite a lot of things about, I can just talk on a high level how our algorithms have evolved, and that itself could be a very good starting point.
Learning point. Because many people are taking the journey and they're still discovering this thing, and it may not be exactly the same project they're applying it for, but many instances where it can lead to.
And now I have followed a very, I would say, interesting approach for me, where if a model did not go into production because it was not optimized, or there were some things that were not great for the model to go into production, what I do is I make a Medium blog post and release that. Instead of going that work as waste, I can at least release that on Medium.
Yeah, it's more like a learning. You're just feeding more humans with some learning things so that they can evolve from the learnings.
Exactly. Either it is a model or it is a side exploratory task that I did. Then if that's not used in our current company, then I put it onto Medium, and because of that, there's quite a lot of high quality content that is generated by me, because of the same reason that I am trying to put something in production. So it is like real world use case scenario. I generate a lot of ideas. Maybe some of them are not production ready, so I keep all of those and document them on Medium, so it's useful for people. Only the ones that I have exclusively trained for my company, because of like IP rights, etc. Of course, I work for a company, I have to honor that as well. Because of that, I don't release that. But all this auxiliary learning that I do as part of my job and all those things, I keep on Medium. So it got me a great balance that I could work on something interesting, and I could provide value for Medium, because I'm not writing any general post. I'm producing high quality posts because I'm working in a company as well. I'm able to produce these high quality posts. So it was like a win-win for both, and for the company as well. It's like PR for the company. If lead data scientist is able to contribute so much back to the company, then the company is highly valued in investors' eye as well as the world's eye, right? So
just like how H2O does it, they have Kaggle masters, grandmasters on Kaggle. They have Abhishek, they have
Sanyam,
and there's a lot of people that are there just to provide that cool factor for H2O. It brings me to a very interesting point, Gautam, and like you're saying, right? I recommend a lot of people to write down what they're learning, right? Initially, it may not be that helpful, but it sort of gives you that time. Over time you are like building a personal brand, which is like, someday somebody discovers you or reads one article, it gives you more weightage for you to get hired, right? Hey, I mean, this guy's writing also, right? He's also posting on this thing, he's influencing, right? And another crucial part that struck me is that if you have interesting projects that you have, like you've worked on, right, and you wrote one article, which means obviously that work has been done throughout the years, but now that you put it out, it is new and fresh for a lot of audience. Which goes back to a lot of our new learners. When you're learning projects, so initially when we started about, you have an end project in mind or something like that. When you're building some products and then you're writing about it, naturally you are appealing to a lot of audience who want to do that. Or, like Gautam says in some of his quotes, you push the envelope so far that you naturally become a very viable candidate to get hired, right? And that's where the data science sort of is leading to, where you are like, hey, showcase some of these cool stunts and put it out there, like for free of course. Let others learn, let others pick these concepts. We have a lot of people that do the same thing. Like we have some Akshay who did some of the computer visions, who's trending in LinkedIn. We have Abhishek who's trending again because of the Port Times Grandmaster. And we have a lot of other these candidates who just trend because they put into effort into one particular single thing. And then you will see that it's a rolling stone from there. Like you do one project, you'll naturally be inspired to do some other projects and keep going.
And one small thing to add from me was that I believe that I'm a community-made data scientist, which means that I did not get formal official training in either college or school to become a data scientist, right? Most of my learning was from these Udemy, Udacity, Coursera. So if I was born out of community, it is essential for me to give back to the community.
I absolutely agree. And my YouTube channel I started because of the same community feeling. I grew up watching Mr. Excel. Excel is fun. I sort of thought, okay, hey, I've done this amazing work in a lot of these things. I feel obligated, not like more like obligated, but I feel like very interested to communicate what I have learned in a different new angle, right? And it sort of gives you that good feeling that, hey, you're contributing back to the community that you actually learned from. So, which brings me to this very interesting project of yours, Gautam, that is the AI artist. Now, the moment I saw the AI artist demo video, like, oh wow. The first thing that struck me was, for the audience that we are talking about AI artist, it's a tool developed by Gautam. It's a Google Chrome add-in. Choose a paragraph of your article and it will find the relevant image for you. You can then not take this image directly and put it in your post, but you can actually convert it into an artistic feel with some of the filters that Gautam has added there, and then bring it back to your post. AI artist will actually assist you to get that images. So one of the things that struck me was, is that still copyright or is that not copyright? Like, because you're taking an image, you're like applying a filter and then putting it. So what's your thoughts on that, Gautam?
So one thing is that all of those original images are also copyright-free images, which are sourced from Pixabay and Unsplash.
Okay.
So you are taking a non-copyright image, CC0 image, and you are transforming it. So there are absolutely no problems at all using those images.
Absolutely.
Agreed. One thing to add with AI artist was that it's like my first journey or first side project or entrepreneurship journey starter. So because of AI artist itself, I could get confidence on building an end-to-end app. And then I decided to quit my Silicon Valley job, let go of everything and move back to Hyderabad. Of course, during the course of time, I realized that I could work on potentially bigger problems and different kind of problems that have market size and things like that. And then I worked on 2 different problems apart from AI artist. But it's been my, let's say, first side project, kind of close to my heart. So I keep updating it constantly. So even like 1-2 months back, I released this Chrome extension.
I've used that actually. I'm a noob blogger, so as to say. I regularly blog on my blog. It's lifeholic.in. I'm inventing a philosophy to basically balance everything out in life. I do a pretty random topics that I write about, like, needing atta and relationships and all of that thing. During that time, this is exactly fitting it, right? So you take the random content that I've written and then, generate the suitable image, which helps me focus on the writing part of it. So there's some things that you have written on this particular project, on this this startup that you have here, sorry, the AI Artist. So you're saying AI Artist is here to disrupt book publishing. A writer should only focus on writing great content. The rest, editing, illustrating, publishing, part should be hassle-free and fast. And as the AI artist, we strive to give back valuable time to the writer so that he or she can focus on writing the next bestseller. So obviously, I've seen that you have implemented a portion of it. Is that correct? So you want to evolve it to fully AI assistant for writers. So did you make some progress in that, or do you have some ideas that you would like to share now?
Absolutely.
Now is the best chance for you to share.
Absolutely. So I think it's very important to know the bigger view of AI artist, what it aimed to be. So in general, let's say you are a book writer. Right now you write your drafts and probably you have a soft copy of it, all the written version. You go to a book publisher, and what book publisher does is they do some human NLP task, which is correcting the grammar and
editors.
rephrasing.
They call
exactly, editors.
Yeah.
Exactly. So you have an editor. Right after that, it goes to an illustrator. So what an illustrator does is he or she will try to put a poster image for the book, and then in appropriate places, let's say for every 3-4 pages, there is an appropriate illustration made in the book, because book should be visually appealing. So
absolutely,
maybe there are like 30-40 illustrations throughout the book that follow a theme as well. Because let's say if you introduce a character like Yoda, that cannot look something else, right? Yoda will continue to be in the book
looking like that.
Exactly. And what I wanted to do with AI was exactly the same, which is automate this paraphrasing and rewriting editor part, as well as from the book, try to identify important characters, topics, and create a persona. That means generate an image, maybe using like technologies like GAN, generative adversarial networks,
right,
or some kind of encoders, things like that. Generate these images as characters. Then you use those themes to make running actions. Like if Yoda is running or he is sitting on a river bank, I wanted to generate all those illustrations from a given sentence and maintain a certain theme. So it's aimed to be a very, I would say, advanced project to auto-generate these illustrations. But the smaller step was what I released as Chrome extension.
And probably if you can extend this to PPT making, right? That's some of the pain points that we also go to, right? For example, I choose an image, and in the next one, I want to choose some other image, but in a different angle, or doing something else, I will not have that image, right? I'm stuck with two different images which are not coherent to the story that I'm trying to tell. And I think so that will be a very good tool for a lot of C manager or a director level people. So that's about AI artist. And the reason I wanted to really pick out this is he Gautam picking up a very personal project, or picking up a pain point that he really enjoyed solving, right? And it sort of created a domino effect in him where he got the confidence to not only quit, but he also took on multiple bigger, larger projects. And AI artist, although he implemented a small portion of it, he had a big vision for it. Pick out small parts, but have a continued ticking bind that, let me solve this big problem. And that sort of keeps you engaged, or sort of gives you confidence that you can do anything, no matter what challenges you're facing. And that's where the strength or the superpower of Gautam comes from, where he not only is constantly solving AI artist problem as a parallel, but you see as a side effect, right? He's able to work with so many companies, and is able to do so many tangible stuff, which is not even pushing the envelope for him. It's like he can do that as a left-hand job on the side, which is very interesting to basically have a side project that you personally feel or relate to, and you think if you solve that problem, there will be a good audience waiting for you in the line to use that product. And that's where you are sort of taking a first step to getting the industry, right? Find a problem that is challenging enough for you to resolve. So with that said, Gautam, is there some other challenges that you are looking up? I've seen a lot of your projects like traffic sign classification or lane detection, or some of these Panorama app on Android using OpenCV. You've done a lot of these things, obviously, but what's occupying your mind?
So bulk of the time is occupied by three main projects, I would say, where I spend on, which is one is AI artist, and the other thing is question.ai, which is question generation. And the third one, which I also have spent a significant time and open sourced was automated dubbing. So
Okay.
essentially, let's say you are trying to watch a cooking video of cooking a Spanish dish. There are no English videos available and you get a search result in Spanish. That's it. You can take the YouTube video URL, give it to my program. I will give you a new video with audio converted in English, preserving all the pauses and in the right places. With Spanish voice, you have English voice replaced. That's one of the projects that I did. I also released and open sourced all the code that you can work on AWS using Lambdas itself. That's one interesting project that I wanted to do. The end goal was that if you have like complex scenario, let's say a Friends TV show where you have multiple people talking, can you automatically identify the voices, male and female, and convert that into similar voices in, let's say, completely in Hindi or Spanish, multi-conversation, and all of those. That was my end goal.
So an interesting take on this is, for the audience, if you've done some amount of YouTubing, you'll see that there's a plethora of audiences if you just convert into language. Like take for India itself, if you convert it into Telugu or Hindi, you have a big following coming easily to you just because you've converted that to a language, right? It's the same Excel concept or the machine learning concept that you teach. If you teach it in Telugu, you'll have a far more audience reach. So it's that crucial of a project that Gautam has taken up to solve, right?
One more point is probably, going local or going regional, probably it will target tier 2, tier 3 audiences, right? So that's where most of the YouTube Hindi videos are booming, right? So that way I think there's a huge scope.
With that, now it's time to get into our rapid fire round with Gautam. Let's get started. What do you prefer, being a generalist or a specialist?
Generalist.
R or Python?
Python.
SQL or Excel?
SQL.
Is AI part of ML or ML part of AI?
ML part of AI.
Udacity versus Udemy versus Coursera. What would you choose?
Udemy without any doubt.
Are certificates valuable?
Not really.
What libraries are important to know for a data science beginner's level?
Scikit-learn, NLTK.
What is the right way to hire a data scientist?
An open-ended project that was never given anywhere.
Data analyst versus data scientist. What's the difference?
Data analysts are closer to data than data scientists.
Do you think MBA is required?
No.
So here's the question that probably some of the first posts that Gautam made. MBA is not required. And he also went ahead and said that if you think you know things doing MBA, think about how Indian marriages are managed, right? Do you think you can manage that? So what was the thought going on during that time?
So basically, I got married recently, and you get this wisdom from marriage and all these things, right? So when you go through a marriage, there are at least 10 to 15 simultaneous tasks that you have to manage, and everything has to reach that production level.
Correct.
So if you go through a proper South Indian marriage, at least, so I made a fun on MBA, just like light humor. That either if you are already married and gone through this, there's no need to do MBA.
You have an in-house brain sort of collaborating and creating a lot of these synergies that you never thought that were earlier there. And another leading question is that you have this overproductivity that you're talking about. So how do you create a balance between your work and this overproductivity and the time that you need to give back to your partner or family, I have to say, or even friends?
I'm constantly trying to take a day off and switch work by 10 p.m. To be honest, I think that it's still a struggle for me, the overproductivity. I'm trying to balance that.
I can relate to this. You can't simply switch off your brain and that you're almost close to solve something and then, oh no, it's time up. Exactly. And I have to drop it there, right? I mean, that's something that is like probably the curse of some geeks that we have, but I see where you're related. But my personal closing time is like 4 p.m. I stop work and then there are some personal time, 1 hour or something like that, where I create content or, mentor or do some of that. But apart from that, I generally try to keep my evenings free.
On a lighter note, whenever I'm working deeply, I always think, why couldn't humans evolve to not eat food or sleep? Yeah. Maybe there is a superior evolution that avoids these things.
True. And speaking of quotes, Gautam has one full article on some of the quotes, and it sort of, whatever we have discussed toward this thing, it sort of summarizes some of those aspects, right? One of your very interesting quotes, basically, this one: if you start the race with everyone and come first, the audience will clap. But if you start the race when everybody finishes their half mark and still come first, the game will clap. Be the game changer. Set the bar way too high. What was your motivation, and what point did you write this particular quote?
To give a short brief, I think all the quotes pretty much came up from my aggressive entrepreneur journey as well as accelerated career pathway. Throughout the phase, I used to constantly think, and all these quotes are born out of that journey, and all of them are absolutely original. So I always joke with my friends, if I was, like, let's say, very famous, a movie star or someone like Elon Musk, all these quotes would be on the poster walls of everyone.
Yeah.
But just because I'm me, they are not famous yet, but that's just for fun.
You already got one fan already to look at some of these quotes.
Thank you. So mostly that there was one instance where I came up with this particular quote of race, right? So every time we used to, as a startup, whenever we used to go to big companies, they used to say, we have a team of 15-20 data scientists. Whenever we are doing Aurora question generation, we used to go and pitch, right? We have a team of 15 to 20 data scientists. Why do you think we can't build this at home? We have people who are 10 years plus 20 years experience more than me. So I always used to say them, if you think you can build it in-house, please build it. Only when you think you cannot build it, come to us.
Correct.
So there I used to think, just because you started a race ahead does not mean that you will reach the goal. Correct. Maybe there is a different pathway with higher ambition, more focus that will get you. So that instance, I woke up and I got this idea, then I decided to pen it down.
And you know what I can recollect in this particular thing? I was reading about a story where the Wright brothers were actually, they developed this plane out of a cycle shop, and there was the same amount of money given to a professor with highly qualified credentials, with all the money that he had, all the best people in the team that they had, right? They couldn't develop a flying prototype, but Wright brothers, with cycle shop and that grit to do it, they have solved and cracked the first flight ever. I mean, which is like a very interesting comparison that we can bring out in terms of how you sort of look at self and the personality that we get to know from Gautam, right? And some of these motivation lines, I'm sure you have personally kept it close so that it keeps you motivation.
It's important to be always practical. To be very honest, it took me 2-3 months during the COVID to find a job.
Correct.
Just because even if you are probably good, it does not mean that the market is ready and there are opportunities, right? So always it is important to be grounded and do your tasks just as well and not to put headweight. That's one thing. And one thing to add is that there's my all-time favorite quote, which I always follow, and it's been through my journey, is start as an underdog, rise at such a pace that before people even realize, dethrone the king. Correct. And take charge. Because when people used to ask, what happens if Google enters your space? Like whenever you're building a startup, that's the most prominent question. What happens if Amazon or Google enters your space? I used to say that I'll acquire it.
Correct. Absolutely. I mean, very right. Again, at Gautam's level, also there are a lot of challenges that he constantly faces, right? It's not that you are facing a job crunch or or some of the questions that we often get is, can I get a job in data science after doing this course? The answer is you can answer, because what are you willing to do, or what is that fire that is there within you, right? Even for the people that have no stat background or math background, you can do it, provided that you take in and put in that effort and then stay true to yourself when you're doing that journey. And you've seen some of the things that we have discussed that sort of add to your journey, and then you are able to get into this particular industry. Which brings me to the last section of this particular podcast. And so far, we've got some intense topics from Gautam, obviously, and we want to really give our audience a sneak peek on some of the thoughts that you have personally. Again, this can be your own personal thoughts. How do you see the data science evolve in this current scenario, and how does the future of data science look for those who are like looking to enter in this particular industry currently?
So one thing is that with COVID, many of the companies, of course, they are having cash crunch and they lay off people. So like with regular software engineers, data scientists are also largely affected.
Mm-hmm.
And one thing is that there is definitely a shortage in the jobs in the market. That is undeniable.
Mm-hmm.
So one thing to keep in mind is to keep the progress constant, even if the finances are not constant. That's what I always believe.
Correct.
And the second thing is, because of the COVID scenario, probably few of the things will be booming. That means like education. If you see Vedantu and all these things, almost they picked up cash overnight. If I want to say,
absolutely agree with you. Yeah,
because investors are like frenzy.
Mm-hmm.
There's a FOMO. FOMO means fear of missing out.
Correct.
So because of FOMO, investors invest in things that they
Mm-hmm.
think could blow up because of any situation or scenario.
Exactly,
So
like what's happening to with Zoom also.
Exactly. So one thing is that I always believe that any data scientist or even computer science people in general, there is some necessity to have an entrepreneurial mindset to try and gauge the business as well. That means whenever you're trying to do online projects, now try to do things that are more focused on sectors that are booming,
Mm-hmm.
and try to put your portfolio and everything tailored to that as well, your projects and your resume. That's one thing to do on our end.
Mm-hmm.
And second thing is to make constant improvement. And I mean, people can take away job, but they cannot stop progress if you're hell-bent on it. And when, let's say, the scenario gets back to normal in 1.5 year or 1 year, 2 years time, you will be at a much stronger position
Mm-hmm.
to be able to get a high paying job than everyone else who was just frenzied and worried and did not make progress. A third thing was that to be open for freelancing on these things like Upwork, Fiverr, all these things. Also just keep yourself open.
So, this 1.5 years, it's going to take 1.5 years to probably recover, maybe sooner or whatever it is. Like, don't use this time to be just anxious about things, but hey, take this time, utilize this effectively to hone your skills in such a way that when the market is ready, you are in line to be or in the top of the funnel to be hired in a high paying job. Invest a lot of time in learning and building projects that actually matter and that grabs attention or solves some real problem. And hey, Laisha and Yogesh, you have some questions, you can definitely go ahead.
Hearing about your journey of how you started your entrepreneurial journey, you would have failed at some steps, you have learned from that, risen again. So what currently is that makes you feel inspired or like your best self even today with all of these ups and downs in your life?
I always think the future is bright. Either it is new research that's getting me interested and solving problems at my current job. That's also very, very interesting for me. And fortunately, I was able to apply some question generation knowledge from my previous startups into the current job as well. So one thing that I would like to mention is that even if you do quite a lot of tasks in the technology across various stacks, like Steve Jobs mentioned, you can only connect the dot after looking backwards. No, exactly. When I'm tasked to do a certain task, instead of giving a code and telling to the CEO or CTO it does things like this, I since I do full stack as well, I build a complete demo, and I ask them to go to the URL. And they can try out the T5 model and generate all those question generations and see for themselves. So all these things have helped me to build that complete portfolio. And tech itself is very exciting for me. To be honest, a lot of people say that Indian engineers are forced by parents, but if I can be anyone in the world, I would choose to be an engineer as I mean, despite everything.
So every day, like you juggle with a lot of roles, like you have your work, you write articles, and you are also working on a lot of your side projects, right? So with all of that, how do you still continue to learn, in order to stay on top of things with what's going on in the tech, what new technologies are coming, and what the people are doing around the world?
So my go-to things are LinkedIn and Medium. That's one thing that I follow. And the second thing, which is one of the most important things, is that I'm open to buy time even in my work to do a course. Usually people are shy to say that I want to take a course to solve this project. Then it feels that as if you are inefficient to do that. You are not very good at your task. But I take an honest approach where I take Udemy courses. I sign up for a new Udemy course almost every week. For example, let's say I don't understand simple queue service in Amazon Web Services, where you send in requests. And if I don't understand something, I just go, although it is like $10-15, I just think that I'm paid so much for a job. If I get this part wrong, it's cost more to the company. So without a further thought, I just buy, even if I have to watch 5 minutes or 10 minutes video, I buy the video course. So that's one thing that I do, which is, I would say, not many people can honestly admit that they take courses while doing job and things like that, but I'm very open. Like, I don't know something, I learn and do it. Yeah.
Hey Gautam, if you could review my course on Udemy, it's free. It'll be very helpful.
Sure, Anil.
I get a lot of questions about how to start data science and about job and all, right? So I'm assuming that most of them are going behind it because of the hype, or it's trending, right? So I think if, since you are in this field from long time, if you have to give a reality check of what is data, like why someone should be a data scientist and all, because you are in this field and you have seen the struggle that someone goes through while working, or while making the ML based app to a production, right? So what reality check that you want to give to the new young data scientist?
So, well, salary will keep you only motivated for a few years, because humans are complacent. That means whatever salary I get, I always try to look for other benefits to be there, more flexibility and things like that. So chasing that, maybe in the initial stages, I don't disagree that if you want to pay back your loans and all those things, it's okay. But in the long run, you will realize that you need a bigger passion. And the short answer to you is, data science is a very big umbrella. In that, I see computer vision. Then in natural language processing, again, there is text and voice. And then you have your regular machine learning projects that are like credit card fraud and dealing with data. To be very honest, I'm not a big data fan. That means I don't really love juggling with these traditional ML models. Where I mostly enjoy is applied AI, where I want to solve a real world problem, but I'm at the stage, fortunately, to understand even what state of the art is, and I'm able to put together something to solve. That's where I do most of the work. So as a data scientist, there are few things that we want to get right when you're starting out as a career. That means the end goal projects in text, machine learning, traditional machine learning or computer vision, do they interest you on a higher level when you look at the project? And is it something that, do you want to play around with images quite a lot, work with histograms, change those parameters, or you love to do some text analysis, find keywords, things like that? If you're enjoying any of those individual processes in a sub branch, I would encourage you to go deeper and delve in that and move ahead. That means try to find practical examples that are interesting to you. Maybe it could be like building Alexa. You want to control your laptop with your phone. So some are interested in just voice applications. So things like that. First is to find that niche where it interests you on a personal level, that when you are about to sleep, you are excited sometimes to wake up and solve what was unsolved before.
And basically what does not give you Monday blues.
Yes. Yeah.
Cool. My last question. So, most of the questions are around communities. So since you are trying to build community, right? So what is your thought process, or what is your perspective of someone who was just joining the AI field. What is your perspective of community, and how community can help them to grow, right? Because alone we can do, but I think if we do it together, if we have someone to uplift us, I think we are more faster in terms of our progress, right? So what is your overall view of being in the community? So I'm talking about any community, and it just have to be a like-minded people.
So there is one fundamental thing that I look uh, at a higher level when I think about communities. One is, if you look in any job in the world, any job market, I'm telling you, there is always a mismatch between what are the job requirements and who are the graduates. Take any field, there is no surplus. That means there is always a dearth of good engineers. Any field in this world. So what that means is that there is never a seamless bridge or transition between what's required in the industry versus what the newcomers are doing, learning. So this is where communities fall in and smoothen the transition as much as possible. So we have seen like great communities that have come up in ML, like Co-Learning Launch made with ML, Papers with Code, all of them solve certain problems. That means Papers with Code, if you want to find the most research papers and things like that. Whereas Made with ML is more generic, because there could be a tutorial that is great. Not everyone writes papers. So there could be like beginner stuff that is great. So if you want to put all those things together, then there's Made with ML. Then you want to form local communities and improve that mismatch and reduce that gap. Then you have local communities like ours and Push Start that are working together towards that. So the goal of any community is to build a network so that the people who are there is a requirement on the job front, then there are people who are looking for that. Then how do you smoothen the transition and level up both the games? That is what a community essentially does. And to be honest, like offline engagement is important, but because of COVID, unfortunately, we are not able to do that. But if possible, that personal connection, all those things take you a long way as well. And my goal is that all these communities essentially work towards this goal of empowering newcomers, be it students or people who are transitioning into data science newly, and bring them up to the mark of what is required at the industry, and also continuously monitor where the industry standard is and talk to people in the industry and bring the other side folks up to the mark.
It sort of creates an exposure for the new people that are coming in to be able to give a jolt about what's really happening and what they need to be doing to be able to make that jump from this side to that side.
Exactly.
So I think one question I'll ask is, since Ramshri, you are a startup guy, right? Probably entrepreneurs value networking or too much, right? Because that's where they get help or investment or whatever you ask, right? So that's the one thing which we don't really value being a developer, because we would like to work in silos, or we are, I think, introvert or not that open or shy to go forward and talk to people, or go into that pool of connections, right? So how would you tell us the importance of networking being a developer or developer of any sort, basically not related to data science, but yeah, how is networking so important to a techie, right? Because if not today, when we grow, in terms of in our professional ladder, I think at some point we need to connect with like people to get our growing smoother, right? So personally, to me, connections and networking is very, very important. But I've seen people not valuing that much. Just wanted to see your perspective of it.
Just to give the background on this, hey guys, Gautam is his superpower obviously is getting any application to deployment, but there's another secret superpower is he has also that entrepreneur and that business mindset also. So yes, Gautam, please tell us about that.
Back in Bay Area, among our friends, we used to say one thing: either if you want to rule the Bay Area, you need to have two things, either network or net worth. Either if you don't have these things, forget about ruling the Bay Area. So networking is the main thing that can bring a Theranos from a small side project. Theranos is a company that was valued billions, but it's not there anymore. But she knew the right people and got up till that 8 billion mark, building the product and things like that. And to be honest, networking is so crucial that even when during my COVID job search, most of the things that helped me was my entrepreneur first network in Singapore. And because of that, I could get connected to other opportunities and things like that. I could be a good data scientist and do great things, but people, unless they have worked with you previously, they do not have the personal attachment, or they cannot vouch for you to somebody else.
Correct.
Sometimes people reach out to me, there are other jobs, can you please refer me? But the thing is, to be able to refer somebody to somebody else, I need to know that
what you have done,
what you've done, how is your interaction, how do you communicate, are you diligent enough, or do you slack, all these things. And all these things only come from networking, and absolutely there is no other way around this. Of course, there are people as engineers, to be honest, we are not born to be networkers. That's one thing that I would say. And the traditional system in India and other developing countries is that you focus corely on learning the topic and nothing else. So there is no other aspects as well. And I personally came from that scenario itself. So I was not that active in my undergrad, and my biggest jump came after going to US and then opening up and trying to do more tasks and put my work out there. So for shy people and introverts, I think one best way is to start blogging, because at least you are not talking to anybody, you just put your thoughts out there. Maybe even if thoughts come once a day, put all of them for 10 days and then post a blog. And one thing to note is that my blogs are not written, most of my blogs are not written overnight. Some blogs are waiting for like months even. That means whenever I get a great title, I go and put the title and
draft. Yeah.
Yes, exactly. So I have almost 15-20 drafts waiting. Few of them half filled, quarter filled, things like that.
Same here.
Yeah. So for introverts and shy people, I would advise that. Then the second thing is to go to these meetups, etc. Of course, now it's COVID, but mainly in Hyderabad and Bangalore, there are these startup meetups, etc. You go there and just try to ask one or two questions to the whoever is conducting, or try to talk to with one or two people. Just have a goal to talk to one in one meeting. It's not a big goal, and you don't need greater challenges with them. So similarly, I think what most people fail to understand is, if you see, to be honest, I would say most of the people at the top, including even data scientists or C-level people, a lot of people 2 to 3 levels below that can fulfill their jobs better, even much higher than them. The only reason why some of them are there is because of strong networking, whereas the other ones do lack networking. And I have seen it firsthand that someone scales up to, let's say, chief marketing officer or anything like that. Simply they come because they took like very fast, rapid steps, and they jumped 2-3 ladders here and there. Either through networking, they got a higher title and scaled up there. Not necessarily they will fulfill those duties very well. So there are a lot of opportunities that are missed because of not networking. True.
Personally, I've been on that front where most of my job jumps were just because of my network. That's it.
My current job is also because of networking.
Most of the recent graduates, or those who are starting their career and all, don't have a good, or at least a LinkedIn profile, right? And I'm sure they are pretty active on Instagram or latest TikTok. So what do you suggest about having the social presence on LinkedIn, right? Because I think it's a great way to build your own profile and build ultimately your own brand, right? So I think, what is your suggestion about that?
So I think for newcomers, it is tough journey. That means mostly there is an imposter syndrome. So imposter syndrome is whether I am worth it, even if you are probably
self-doubt.
good, and you always self-doubt. Exactly. So, I mean, it happens to every one of us. Even sometimes I feel when I go in front of a large audience, there might be greater people, like people with higher knowledge. Can I teach them? So I have that as well. So for beginners, it's in their highest peak because they have one tagline that's running in their mind that I'm inexperienced, I don't know much. Now, one thing that they can do to alleviate that is first start sharing great work. That is one thing. Slowly you build your audience. Then slowly try to add few more things. Share a work and share your 2-3 line insights on what you feel about that. Maybe you could be wrong. There could be people who disagree, but just start sharing, and slowly you try to write some beginner tutorials. That means, see, only a beginner can understand a beginner well. I would say that. I might assume that they would know sentiment analysis, they would know word embeddings and teach something, but only a beginner who is teaching and another beginner will understand well. So a beginner, if he has learned and mastered a topic, they can write a beginner level topic better than anyone else. Only when you learned a certain topics, you would understand where things are not clear to another beginner, then you can teach another beginner well. If you see in school, better than any of the teachers, if 1 hour before you go to your friend, whatever he or she explains to you, that's the best explanation you can get for the topic. Similarly, so what beginners can do is once they master a topic or learn it to a certain extent, they can write a beginner level topic on understanding that and blog about it. Second thing is sharing great content and sharing your insights on top of that. With this, you can build your portfolio and start building your portfolio, and slowly as you get to know more, you will add intermediate stuff and advanced level stuff. I mean, I am very, very, I would say, fond of beginners because I came from that route, and absolutely there were no resources for me other than online resources. So I continuously try to find balance between those. That means offering a project with T5 transformers for the advanced ML community and writing beginner level posts on what is ML, things like that. I try to find this balance. So beginners should grow from there and slowly from to intermediate level, and then doing their own training of models. You can do quite a lot of things without training any model. I completely believe in that. You can put together several pre-trained models and build an awesome portfolio project. So beginners should aim to do that.
That was pretty intense with Gautam, the Bahubali of Hyderabad in terms of data science. And not only that, a full stack developer with a kick-ass side on ML, specifically applied AI. Thank you for giving us a chance to get to know you closely, Gautam, and hope our audience here got to learn a lot in terms of what they should be doing in terms of the journey, how they should be keeping the motivation going on, the importance of community networking, the importance of projects or end goal in mind in terms of tailoring your learning objectives and positioning yourself in such a way that you are constantly working and motivated towards this field. Thank you for that. And with this, I would like to thank you for attending this podcast. We have a good lineup of podcasts coming in. Stay tuned. Thank you.